All right, we're back with another episode on Team Hybrid Racing YouTube channel. Behind me, we've got a completely empty engine bay, and we need to put some stuff in it. Last night, Todd and I worked on the lawn block. We got everything back together. Our new Brodix heads, fresh gaskets, half-inch studs, measured our push rods, got our BTR, rockers in there. Everything's ready to go to drop back in. Additionally, way in the back there, also got our transmission back from Cone. Did a full maintenance refresh on it. 2 seasons, everything looked pretty good, but we just did a little bit of maintenance. Also got our converter, tightened it up a bit with more power we're hopefully throwing at it. We're ready to rock, so let's get started. First up, we're gonna go ahead and put the exhaust manifold gaskets on and the manifolds themselves. I got a fresh pair here. As you can tell, I put the intake manifold over on the table. We don't need it to install it, but I'm gonna try to put as much things back on this while it's out, make my life a little easier. And then we'll get the cherry picker out and drop this dude in. We're gonna do this in a 2-step process. First, we're gonna put the engine in, and then later on, we'll put the transmission in. Kind of similar to how I took the transmission out than the engine. I can do both at the same time, but it's definitely easier just to do it piece by piece. Also, if you did watch the transmission video, I about dropped it on myself. I did pick up a nice new tool. We'll get into that later when we go to put that transmission in. Maybe something you might want to pick up yourself. So let's get these exhaust manifold gaskets on. Probably grab the spark plugs, get the wires on, and get this thing hooked up to the chains, ready to drop back in. So now that we've got the manifolds on, the next thing I want to do is go ahead and put our spark plugs in. In front of you, we see we've got this WAF Racing holder, spark plug holder. I've just bought this, 3D printed. It's fantastic, holds all your plugs. It's got a kind of label driver side, passenger side, front, rear, etc. These are already gapped, ready to go. We're running NGK 8s. So we'll get these in, and then I think there's just a few small things that I need to hook up on the engine. Otherwise, it's almost time to put this guy back in. So drop these in real quick, and then we'll get the engine set up. So now's the time we've been waiting for. We've got the engine behind me here up on the hoist. Went ahead and put the spark plugs in, a few other little miscellaneous items, and I think it's ready to drop in. So without further ado, here we go. With how tight the engine bay is, if I take the hood off, I can go up a lot higher and just drop right in. A little bit of a pain in the butt. So what I'll do now is just kind of put a little bit more angle on the engine and be able to get past the front crank pulley. I could always pull that off as well. Either option works, but we'll just put a little angle on it. Slide it right in. Okay, both motor mount bolts are slid in place. So this, the 240 actually has the K member. Now this is an aftermarket K member, but the factory one just uses simply just two bolts that hold it all in place. So I've got both those in just to kind of place it. You need to make sure I get, like I said, all my stuff out of the back off there. And then really it just kind of sits. Everything's hard mounted, it's solid mounts. There's no urethane bushings or anything except for on the transmission tail, but as far as the engine goes, it's just solid mounted, so we'll be able to tighten that up and be ready to go. All right, sitting in there, so let's go ahead and pull this hoist out of our way. Pretty simple. Everything looks like it cleared good, so don't see any issues there. There's really quite a bit of space between the back of the engine and the firewall. Like if you wanted to get like real race car with it, you could probably push it back another 2 inches or so, but I'm not worried about that. We're not going for any kind of crazy records or class racing or something. I mean, more specific class racing. Anyways, I'm mumbled too long. Let's get this crane out of the way, move it over there, and then time to just start plugging stuff in. This is my favorite part because it just starts going together like Legos. Really just start snapping, connecting this piece, that piece, exhaust, blah, 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 blah. Next thing you know, you got a full engine in there, ready to fire up. But we got a little bit of ways before we get to that. When you start hooking up your harness on the back side of the engine, again, try not to pinch anything, get anything caught. There's a lot of stuff going on. And your engine, your setup may be a little different than mine, but one thing that you definitely want to do, whether you're on a Holley or even stock ECU, is make sure you have your grounds all hooked up. If you don't have ground set up on the engine, typically it's not going to start. On my setup, I have one main ground on the block itself to the frame, and then additionally on the Holley harness, I've got grounds on each of the heads. So I've already gone ahead and put the passenger side on, but we need to go ahead and put the driver's side on. And again, if you forget this, you'll figure it out pretty quickly that you forgot something, because if you don't hook these up, it won't be very happy with you. Promise you that. Most everything's hooked up that we need to before we're going to drop the intake manifold on. So I like to put just some rags in there so I don't drop a bolt or anything. But for the most part, I think we're just about ready to drop this intake manifold on. So let's get these out. The other thing you want to make sure you do before you put your intake manifold on is if you have a steam vent. I'm just using a factory LS1 steam vent. With the BTR intake, a lot of the aftermarket ones don't really fit underneath, and I really don't like the look of the ones that go over top. I feel like it just clutters the look of the intake manifold. So I just use the factory one. I like to use all 4 ports. That way you're, catching those air pockets from anywhere from the back, because most of the time that's probably where they get stuck anyhow. The later models actually had the back blocked off, but I'd rather just have it all there. So if you have anything in there, take that out, give it one last look. I think we're good to go. So I'm gonna go grab that intake manifold and let's drop her on. Here we go. Take a look, make sure we didn't pinch anything. Got plenty of room there. Yeah, cool. Okay, intake manifold is sitting on. There's 10 bolts. These are actually Allen bolts on here. So I'll get those torqued down. There's a sequence, but essentially kind of start in the middle and work your way out. I'd have to look up the torque. I want to say it's 18 foot-pounds, I think.
I was way off.
All right, everything in the back is connected up. We're good to go back there. So now we're going to focus on the front. I've ran the harness to the front here, the turbo line, other sensors, throttle cable. We'll go ahead and put our fuel line back on because this actually kind of sits up underneath. So we'll get this on and then just start connecting the dots. think the torque spec on these might be 22 foot-pounds or 18. Torqued. Okay. Let's put this crossover back on. All right. I don't think I showed all of it, but this exhaust fought me going back together. Again, everything's solid mounted. So any movement, and we had it in like a perfect spot. It was tough. I really think that I kind of want to redo this. I mean, not change it much, but probably go to that 2.5 inch crossover. There probably is power to be had with that, especially now that we've got the heads on it. We've got an 84. Who knows? We might go to a bigger turbo at some point, and that would be good. Plus, I mean, it's been on the car for like 6 years. It's served its purpose, but I think we could tweak it and make it a little bit better. So I may have to call up my dude over at Fish Fab and also hit up the awesome folks at Vibrant. I've got tons of Vibrant stuff on here, so we may be doing a new crossover. In the interim, I'm going to leave it like this for the night and come back and get back at it in the morning, where we will finish buttoning up the engine bay and start putting the transmission in. So let me show you where we ended up. Again, we've got our crossover. Everything's all tight there. Water pump's on, so we still need to do an alternator. Obviously put the belt, a couple wire connections. We need to get the radiator back in, which is sitting on the floor over there. I do want to flush that out before we do that. We've got our back pressure sensor, so a couple small sensors. We've got our lines that we need to run over the catch can, and then obviously we'll do a full check over everything. Throw some fresh driven GP1 oil in this bad boy and see if we can start it up. So we're gonna hit it back early in the morning. I think Todd might come over and give me a hand, which would be awesome. We'll see. And then fingers crossed we get this dude started up soon. And then it gives me a good solid 6 weeks to figure out if I want to change everything before we get out there. So we'll start again tomorrow. Okay, I'm back out here in the garage the next morning, and you can see it's a little cold out here, but we got the heater going. This is a little propane heater. The table of parts is getting smaller. Right now what I see is we've got an alternator, we've got one of our charge pipes, our lines to go to the catch can, radiator hoses, and the radiator itself. So I think first step is going to be putting all that back in, finish wrapping up what we've got left in the engine bay, and then at that point we'll go ahead and raise up the car, slide that transmission back in. So here's what we're looking at under the hood. Got a lot done last night, yesterday. A few small things, like I just mentioned, stuff over on the table, but our parts list is getting smaller and smaller. Let's go ahead and get started. Get that alternator on. Step one. The alternator I use is just a standard F body, and then we've got an ICT bracket. What this does is no power steering and just eliminates that. A couple spacers, a couple bolts. There's not much to it. Throw it on. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that my alternator has a fairly large pulley on it. Factory alternators, they're not really made to spin at the RPM that we take this thing to, so we try to stay under 8,500. But if you overspin them, you can really burn up the alternator. So we're running a larger pulley on this thing. We got it from Hoosier Pulleys. I did a whole episode on why you want one of those, how you get it, installation, etc. I will post that above, so you can check that out if you want as well. But it really helps save alternators. Before I did that, I was killing them every season. Now we haven't had any problems. So we'll get the cert belt on and start in on that radiator. Before we toss the radiator in, I kind of wanted to just go over a couple of the specs on this thing. That's what I've been trying to do with this video, is kind of give you a little bit more inside on what my setup is. As I mentioned, this is a PWR CNR radiator that was custom made. Luckily, they're local to me, so makes things a little easier. It is a dual pass, as you can see here. So it comes across, all the way across twice, which is super nice. 2-inch thick core. It's roughly 16 inches tall, 22 inches wide, and then our end tanks are probably about 2 inches as well, seeing as that looks like a square. We've got mounting tabs off the side that we had added, and then let me flip this dude around real quick. You can get a look at what we've got going over here. So again, I think that's probably a 15 or 16 inch spow fan. Just bad mamma jamma. And then we put a 2.5 inch shroud, the biggest shroud that we could fit in there. And then we've got the little flapper doors as well. So when we're just cruising along, the fan, you know, pops open like that. What else? Like I said, it's a dual pass, so it comes across there. We've got our pressure sensor in there. We run our steam vent hose back on this side, and then of course this goes to our little overflow tank. So really nice custom piece. Had this built before I did Six Summer the first time in 2023, and she's a beast. If you're looking for something and it's not out there on the market, get with those dudes, and they'll build you something real nice. Now with our radiator and hoses all installed, we can put our upper charge pipe back on. Includes the vacuum source, our air temperature sensor, as well as our blow-off valve. We've got our Vibrant HD clamps. Go ahead and slide this on. Just have to get the collar over the O-rings. Drop that down in place. Put our clamp on. Once that's in place, we can swing this one around and drop our bolt back in. All right, guys, that about wraps it up as far as the top goes. I do see I need to put my back pressure sensor line on, but I think we're going to change a fitting on that, so I might change that before we go ahead and button that up. Looks like we've covered everything on top. Obviously, we still have to put oil in it, water in it. So I'm going to go ahead and raise the car up, get underneath, throw the starter back on, put the crank sensor in. Our turbo drain line needs hooked up, and maybe I'll take a look, just make sure I didn't miss anything else. And at that point, we get a new tool put together. I did buy a transmission jack. If you saw the video where I pulled the transmission and almost dropped it on myself, you'll see why I bought that tool. We'll get that put together, try to get this transmission back in. I'll do a quick tool cleanup, but I'm pretty sure I just heard Todd pull up. Oh, what do you know? There he is. Say hi to everybody, Todd. Got some major progress done. Okay. Everything's done up top. On the bottom, we got it raised up. Time to put together the new toy. So Todd's got our new fancy scissor transmission jack. Pop that dude open. Here you go.
Perfect.
This should make our life a lot easier. The other nice thing about this is it's quite a bit more compact than the setup I had before. I think I had mentioned I borrowed a floor jack, floor transmission jack. The thing was beefy. I mean, it was probably made for like school bus transmissions or something. It was massive. So I think this is gonna work out a little better for us. Cool, easy enough. All we had to do was put the gaskers on. What do you think, Todd?
Super simple, make life easy.
Now
Especially if you're trying to do it by yourself.
Yeah.
A little nice strap so you don't kill yourself. So.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
All right, we still unfortunately don't have enough room to set it on that and slide it underneath. So we're gonna grab the transmission from over there, slide it underneath, probably get it in place, and then we'll have to get the converter out, get some fluid in that, get the converter. Well, you know what? Let's get fluid in the converter on the transmission before we put it underneath.
Yep.
That's probably the best way to go about it. So let's do that next. Perfect. All right, I got the trans moved over by the car. Todd's got our converter. And Todd, we tightened it up a little bit.
Yep.
I think that's what I said.
We tightened this thing up a little bit. We had an issue last year that took us a little bit of time to figure out. So we actually loosened the converter, but then we found the issue towards the end of the year, so started making more power again. So tighten the converter back up for that extra torque that we're making now. So
plus the heads. That's going to add even more.
Plus the head. So we tightened it up so it'll just work a little bit with what we have going forward.
Perfect. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so like you guys have seen before on the channel, we put Todd's transmission in. I'm going to drop a little fluid in that converter. About what, half quart, three-quarter quart?
Put about half a quart in there. You don't want to make a mess trying to put this thing in.
We don't run anything super fancy, at least not right now. We got STP, but might be able to get something from Driven here this year, which would be nice. We could probably run it a little bit longer, fluid-wise. with the heat and stuff. But right now, I'm just running the cheap stuff, and I just change it quite often. So we'll get that half cord in there, and then work on the sliding it on the input shaft.
Yep, get it slid in, gauging the pump gears, and then we should be good to go here. Then we can slide it underneath and get it bolted up to the back of the engine.
Heck yeah. Okay, we are up underneath. Time to get this dude up on the new jack somehow.
Yeah.
Probably need to like slide this over, bring that back, and then try to lift it up onto it.
Yeah.
You kind of need to do it on the pan, obviously. So, all right, so Todd and I worked on getting the transmission up on the new jack, which worked out quite well. Unfortunately, we had to do it underneath the car just because space limitations, but all in all, not too bad. Once we had it up on the jack, I was able to, maneuver it in place and get it lined up with the engine. Took a little bit of finagling, but it worked. After that, had to work on getting, the rest of the sensors, the transmission cooler lines hooked up, the rear mount, drive shaft, shifter, and all the components that just go along with putting the transmission in. I'm not going to go through every single step. It's literally just the reverse of what we just showed in our last video. So I'll tag that up there if you guys didn't see when we pulled the transmission, but it's kind of a pretty straightforward process. So our next step is going to be bolting our converter back to our flex plate. I always like to check anytime we take this thing apart, our spacing between here. So you should have a bit of movement between the converter and the flex plate. So as you can see here, we push the pump out and all the way back in, or the converter all the way back in the pump, and we have a bit of a gap. Now, I have this flex plate actually has 6 holes in it. It can be set up for a 6-bolt style converter, but this is just 3. So these pads are different widths, and unfortunately on the thicker pad, it's just not quite enough gap. So you want between 1/8 and 3/16 of an inch gap. And this is just a little too tight. So we're gonna go ahead and use the ones that I've shimmed down a bit, or ground down a bit, and then we'll use the shims to make up the difference. So I've already measured it, and the shims that we were previously using are gonna work just fine. So I've got my bolt here and my shim, and then I've measured out the gap that's left over once the shim is in here, which gives me this measurement, which falls in between that 1/8 and 3/16 measurement that we're looking for. So we're just gonna start with the first one, and I might actually have to rotate this a little bit, which I don't know if I'm gonna be able to. Okay. Once we get one bolt in there, this won't be too bad. Unfortunately, it just didn't line up well. Depending on how much room you have right here on a stock pan and just the frame of your vehicle, you may have to pull the starter to be able to get a bolt through here. Luckily, with this setup that I have, I don't have to worry about that. So, get our shim in here, like so. Bolt through. There we go. And the nut on the back side. Perfect. And we'll just tighten this first one up. So if you pay attention, you'll see when I tighten up the first bolt, it actually pulls the converter back out, giving us the space that we need. Go ahead and tighten up all your converter bolts, and you'll be set. Okay, now, if you don't have enough gap in here, the issue that happens is you're not allowing for any movement, any flex in here with the flex plate. And so if there's not enough gap, it's gonna push the converter into the pump, which could destroy the pump seal, etc. If you have too much gap, when you go to tighten this up, it's gonna pull the converter all the way this way towards the flex plate. And what that does is now it pulls the converter out of the pump, which could cause a leak. You could have a leak issue back here by the seal, or it could also damage the seal and pump at the same time. So you really wanna check that and make sure, it's good to go. So we now have an engine connected to a torque converter, connected to a transmission with the drive shaft, connected to the rear end. So our drivetrain is now all connected. We've got the transmission fluid filled. We'll do a check once we run the engine for a little bit, run it through the gears. We'll double check the fluid, but primarily filled. So now it's on to putting some oil in. So Driven racing oil, run their GP1. We specifically run the 20W50, and then always run these Wix filters. This is the 515R, which is their racing filter. Much bigger than like a factory LS style. So like, again, I've got that remote set up. So we'll drop a little bit of oil into this dude, you know, get some in there and then put that on, and then we'll start. All right, time has come. We've got transmission fluid in it. We've got 8 quarts of Driven oil in it, a fresh brand new filter. I went ahead and cycled the key with the fuel pump off just to get some of the oil going up into the heads. Hopefully that gets them up in there. I don't think it's too big of a deal. It's not like we built a brand new motor. So now's the time to start it. So it's a little cold in here. It's got E85 in it still. Let's see if it starts. I always get so excited for this part. Looks like 65 pounds. Oh, baby, she sounds good. We'll go ahead and put it through the gears, make sure everything's happy there. Reverse, good. There's first. We rolling? Yeah, I can feel it. Second. And get her through third. She rolling. Cool. Okay. Now we went through all the gears. We'll go ahead and check the trans fluid again. So she's nice and happy. Everything looks good. We added some transmission fluid. I'm not putting any water in it just yet because it's still way too cold for the next month and a half or so before we get a chance to test. So because of that, I don't want to run it for a super long time. So when we do get a chance for a nice warm day, we'll get the transmission up to temp and double check that fluid. Otherwise, that's it, folks. Hybrid is back. Hybrid is together. We've got our Brodix heads on it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. You know, not a lot to it, but just putting everything back together. Give you a few tricks, tips, little things that I do on this car when we put it back together. If you have any questions about putting yours together or what you might want to do, drop a comment down below. And we got to get this car out of the way because we got something else to bring in. Find out on the next one.